Good afternoon. I'm Shayla Connor-Shapiro. I'm this year's board president for the Green Mountain Book Festival. Woohoo, thank you. I want to, just before Mary starts speaking about banned books with these lovely folks, I want to welcome you on behalf of the board, and I want to thank our sponsors, please. Their support has been just incredibly valuable. Burlington City Arts, Fletcher Free Library, Hanson and Doremus Investments, the Media Factory, Northfield Savings Bank, Phoenix Books, Pomerleau Real Estate, UVM Humanities Center, Vermont Arts Council, Vermont Humanities. Many thanks as well to all of our individual donors who have given so generously. I'm going to just turn this over to Mary Danko, who is the director of this lovely institution, the Fletcher Free Library. Let's have a hand for the library.
Thank you all for coming today. It's great to see everybody here on this gorgeous day outside, so thanks for coming in. I'm going to let the authors introduce themselves and say a little something about themselves. I'll do a little introduction before I start asking questions, and we will have some time at the end, 15 minutes or so for the audience questions. So I'll go ahead and start with Stephen.
Okay. So hi, I'm Kiernan, and what do I say? So I was a newspaper journalist for about 20 years, a bunch of places, including the Burlington Free Press for 15 years. And I left there 20 years ago, and I've been writing novels since then, mostly historical fiction in World War II and the time immediately after. Glad to be here.
Hello, I'm Alison Bechdel. I'm a cartoonist. I wrote the comic strip Dykes to Watch Out for many years until 2008, and then I went on to write various family memoirs in graphic form, one of which has been banned a lot of times.
Hi, I'm Kekla Magoon, and I write books for children and young adults. So everything from picture books to middle grade novels to YA novels and nonfiction as well as fiction. And almost all of my books have some kind of theme of identity, social justice, kids trying to figure out who they are, trying to be themselves in the world and trying to make a difference in the world, trying to change the world. So I write a lot about civil rights in historical and contemporary contexts. And so that's a topic right now that people have a lot of questions about in the world. So yes, some of my books are on some banned books lists here and there. The book that is most often banned is not my book about the Black Panther Party, for example, but it is a middle grade novel called The Season of Sticks Malone that is a fun summer adventure about three boys living in Indiana. And that book is the most banned book for reasons that, well, I can tell you more about as we go. All right.
Thanks. My name's Kate Messner. I'm also a former journalist. I used to work at WPTZ years and years ago as a TV reporter. Was then a middle school English teacher for 15 years, and now a children's author. I've written 60-some books, picture books, chapter books, easy readers, middle grade, including most recently, and probably the biggest target of some of the pushback, is a series called History Smashers, which aims, it's graphic nonfiction, so it's nonfiction with lots of photos, illustrations, and comics, and it aims to smash some of the myths that we all learned about history when we were growing up, and not everyone likes those myths being smashed. So.
All right, thank you, everybody. So my name is Mary Danko. I'm the director here at the Fletcher Free Library, and just to give you some idea of what we're dealing with in libraries right now. So we have a mothership, the American Library Association, and they have an Office of Intellectual Freedom. And they track as best they can when books are banned or challenged. And actually, I was thinking about this when I came here. When I first started, books really were never banned. They always were kind of in the challenged status because we could stop them from being banned. That is not what we're seeing right now. We are seeing outright censorship and banning. So they keep track, and I also want to be clear, these are things that are reported. So my sense is, and we think we know this to be true, is that things are vastly underreported because there are places that don't have the capacity or the resiliency sometimes to do the reporting. But in the last year, there's been over 1,200 demands to censor books that we know of. Over 2,500 of those have been unique titles. Many of the bans are now done not just on a single book, but there are several or hundreds of books that are thrown together and saying we want these out of libraries, whether it's school libraries or public libraries. A challenge is any kind of demand to take a book off a shelf. I think you probably also, we're I think a well-informed, intellectually curious community here. So I know you're probably well-informed of what's going on out there. I will say from a librarian standpoint, again, something that's new for us that's a little bit troubling is that we're actually seeing librarians lose their jobs, being bullied, being threatened, and there have been libraries that have had bomb threats on them. Again, nothing that we ever thought we would see in our industry because we just want people to have the freedom to read books. So with that little intro, I'm going to throw out a question to our esteemed panelists. And I forgot to say I'm so grateful for you all being here. Thank you. Can you tell us, the audience here, about any personal or professional experiences you've had with censorship in your life? And it can be as an author, as a reader, in any way, shape, or form, or something that comes to mind right away.
I'll speak to that. Honestly, I've resisted spending a lot of time thinking about the whole censorship issue because I resent it so much. I have other things I would rather be doing, and it just seems so absurd. Everyone knows this is a bad thing. It should not be happening. But my book, Fun Home, which is a memoir about my father's suicide and my own coming out, has been banned and called obscene, which is really interesting, I think, when it's not even fiction, it's a memoir about my life. So it's like that my actual life is being deemed obscene by these people. So it's very upsetting and annoying, and I never know quite what to do about it. I mean, I'm here in Vermont, where I think you probably all agree with me. So I'm becoming more determined to speak out and find avenues of action, but I still don't know quite exactly what to do. So maybe we can discuss that today.
Well, something that comes to mind for me is just, my books have often been in a little bit of a nebulous place where they're not necessarily being challenged outright, but they're sometimes not purchased, right? A kind of soft censorship of, I don't know if our community can handle having a nonfiction book for teens about the Black Panther Party, so I'm just maybe not going to order that one, or we're not going to stock that one or shelve that one. And so that, in some senses, that's normal because there's, collection development happens everywhere. Bookstores decide what to stock and libraries decide what to stock, and those are normal decisions that are made. But sometimes those decisions are made with a little bit of bias or made with a fear of what could happen, what could be challenged. And so I'm finding that a lot of times I'll go to a community where I'll be talking about the season of Sticks Malone, for example, right, which has been it's a summer adventure about 3 boys, and they are it's a very fun and kid-friendly book that has often been chosen as an all-school read for an elementary school or a middle school. So the whole school is reading it, and I'll get there, and they'll say, well, we have a few of your other books in the library, but I wasn't able to shelve this one, or this one, because those are a little too old for our readers, or those have queer content, or those have, a little, maybe too much mention of the Black Panther Party, a little too much talk of civil rights, right? We want to keep it in this other area, this realm of sort of where we can be comfortable. And so I'm finding anecdotally that there's some fear, even before the outright banning began, there was some fear of the possibility of people banning the books. And so that was the thing I was running up against a lot, because there's nothing you can do when somebody says, well, I didn't buy that because I was afraid my community wouldn't handle it. That there's nothing you can do with that. Whereas when somebody actually challenges it, you can say, okay, let's have a conversation now. Let's look at the process. So that's the thing that feels very insidious to me, is that kind of under the table banning that's also happening.
I can, as the other sort of kid-lit person on the panel, pick up there. I think the reason Shayla invited me to join this panel was because of an incident I had a few years ago. I was scheduled to speak at a school, an elementary school, to 4th and 5th graders about my novel, middle grade novel for upper elementary and middle school kids called The Seventh Wish. And that book is about a family, a character, a 12-year-old, whose older sister is struggling with opioid addiction. So literally something that thousands upon thousands of families in our country were dealing with then and are dealing with now. And this also speaks to the fear that Kekla mentioned. This particular school sent a letter home about my visit and the book. This was an author visit that was canceled abruptly the day before I was supposed to be there speaking with the kids. And when they sent the letter home earlier in the year, they didn't actually have any parent complaints. But right before the visit, they got nervous because, the book does talk about this character whose older sister is struggling with heroin addiction. And she goes to visit her sister at a treatment center, and she worries about her sister the way all of us with family members who struggle with addiction worry about loved ones. And so that was very, very, I think, scary for the school community, the adults, I should say. The kids are always great. But the adults were really a little bit nervous and decided they just didn't want to have the conversation. And so they canceled the visit. Fortunately, a lot of Vermont librarians really pitched in. We ended up having an event at the South Burlington Community Library where every kid got a donated book to take home if they wanted to. So any kid who was affected by that was actually able to get a book. And I think that's the sort of thing we need more of. But honestly, what we need more of are voices speaking up, and a lot of the voices like that we see here in the audience. I will be honest, as a white, hetero, cisgender woman, I am not usually the target of this sort of thing. The lists of banned books that are out there, you can look through them. Some of these groups that are challenging many, many, many books are getting lists of recommended diverse books and using that as the basis for their challenge without even reading the books. So you have books about dim sum being challenged and books about, ordinary things. Like The Season of Styx Malone is one of the best middle grade novels we've had in years. And it's a book that I use all the time when I teach. It's just that it features Black kids. And that's enough for some of these people. So I think we need more voices.
Is this legal?
I know. Isn't this like...
Sorry for interrupting, sorry.
It's okay.
Well, we have the First Amendment. It is not legal, but I think it's pressure, right? And I think taxpayer dollars fund schools, taxpayer dollars fund public libraries. So people think that they have a right to make these challenges. And they can be done very formally, or they can be done kind of insidiously, like you were saying. Go ahead.
I don't know if I maybe want to respond to that question more than say, but there are two occasions in which I experienced an attempt at censorship in my work. One was when I wrote something for the newspaper about a state auditor, and he tried to prevent it from publication. And we went to court, and there is ample precedent, namely Vietnam, the Pentagon Papers about Vietnam that made it so we published, and that was that. The other was it's an interesting story because at the time I was writing about the regulation of physicians in Vermont and how the regulatory system was really very lax and letting everyone get away with kind of wrist slaps. And I wrote about one guy in particular in great detail, and at the end I just had a little sideline thing that was like, here are a bunch of other people. Here's the woman who works at Copley Hospital who wrote prescriptions for herself for 55,000 doses of oxycodone. Things like that. I was just doing a little list from the public records, and there was a guy who was a urologist who had, I don't know if it was a mental difficulty or it was a drug issue, but there was a day that his wife said to him, when you come home from work today, the children and I will not be here. It's just been intolerable to be with you, and you won't go to counseling, and you won't get treatment, and we just don't feel safe. And he went to work, and his first patient was a guy who was having a 6-week checkup after a vasectomy, which is about a 20-second review. And he said, everything's fine. And he went over to the wastebasket, and you know, in doctor's offices, so they don't touch them, you step on them, and it opens it. And he peeled off his rubber gloves and dropped them in and thought, well, while he was there, it's kind of convenient. And he lowered his fly, and he peed into the wastebasket with the patient right there. And so the patient happened to be an attorney, and he went directly to the front desk and said, this just happened, and I want you to document the time and date that it happened. Then he got in his car and he called the medical practice board. And this guy lost his license, I think, for 2 years and had to do certain kinds of counseling. So anyway, I wrote about that, and he sued me for $15 million, and he lost in every motion in every venue, and then he sued me and the newspaper and the company that owned the newspaper for $70 million, and he lost every motion in every venue. And it still cost $55,000 to make this guy go away. So, right, these people may be wrong, and the law may be upheld, but it's still more than a slight nuisance. The difference is that that was individuals, and it was individuals who didn't have an understanding of the law. Now it's much more systemic. But the answer I want to give to whether or not it's legal is actually, I don't want to jump ahead of our conversation, but I think anytime you see any government move in an authoritarian direction and say, we're going to decide what you can read and what your kids can read. We're going to decide for you. That the state is in charge. The medicine for that is democracy. You know, about half of the books that are banned is because they have people of color in them. Well, a poll of Republicans, Democrats alike, 87% say that's wrong. 87% of Americans say that wrong. The other half, primarily, of books that are banned are either about gender dysphoria or gender transition, or they're about sexuality in any way. And that one, the numbers are 74% of Americans think all of that should be protected from bans. So I really feel like part of the answer is that we respond with democracy. School board members that have been elected, they can say no. No, you want to vote for somebody else next time, great, but the answer is no, we're going to keep this book right where it is. But when you're appointed, or you're a trustee of the community in some volunteer way, I don't think you have the strength of the voters behind you. Anyway, so I think the answer is people do things that are illegal all the time. It can be very expensive and troubling to make them go away. And the answer is actually things like this right here.
I think part of what's under what you're saying is that, the letter of the law in most states right now doesn't actually support a lot of the book banning that's happening, or the attempts at book banning that are happening, but legislators are in the process in many states around the country right now of changing the laws so that it is legal. So there's two kinds of things happening at the same time, right? People trying to say, well, we want free speech, but our version, right? We want you to be free to speak the things we want to hear, right? That's what's happening.
Free speech, they just want to, it just means they want to call up people slurs all the time, anyway.
It's a very complicated, like the idea of free speech is that there are entire lawyers who spend their whole career studying it and talking about the nuances of what it means to protect free speech, what it means to have free speech, what speech maybe shouldn't be protected, right? So there are so many levels to what it means for something to be allowed, right, societally, right? There have been many instances over the years, especially around civil rights issues, right, where what is the letter of the law and how people behave in the world are not the same thing, right? And most of the time, there's somebody trying to make it the law, right? That you can't do whatever it is, right? We had segregation laws, and then we had people who were engaging in civil disobedience to overturn them, right? That's an example. And so today, we have lawmakers, for example, I just did a visit in Indiana, which is where I grew up, and they're talking about it's now going to be illegal, starting, I think, January 1st. It's going to be illegal to give a child, third grade or under, any book or material or introduction to a conversation about sexuality. And by sexuality, they mean homosexuality. They say that, but you can still talk about Mrs. and Mr., right? You just can't talk about Mrs. and Mrs. You can't talk about pronouns. They've made that law really broad. I don't know how they're going to get around that because pronouns are part of our culture, but what they mean is you can't talk about somebody using pronouns that they specifically share with you as opposed to the pronouns you assume when you look at them, for example. And so those things are now illegal to share, or will be, starting January 1st, will be illegal to share with a third grader. So like a lot of the things that happened in my own visit, right, I'm talking about experiences in my own life, I'm talking about characters in my own books, not gonna be able to do that again because they've changed the law. So that's the kind of thing we're up against, is that right now, a lot of it is what society will support, but pretty soon it's gonna be what's actually the letter of the law. And so that's the moment we're trying to have not happen, basically.
And even before things get to the point of legality, there's such a climate of fear being created that people are preemptively not buying stuff, not taking risks, and it's that you can't really quantify how much that's happening.
So kind of expanding on, what, if you could venture, I heard a little bit of your answer, Stephen. What is going on today? Like, is it something bigger? And if it is, what do we do about it?
I think it's definitely something bigger. I spoke last night, did a keynote for the whole festival, and I think it's really important to recognize that this is one prong of a multi-pronged attack on democracy. It's happening in many different areas. It's happening with voting rights and abortion rights and trans rights, the right to protest. And somehow we have to keep that all in our mind together, and understand that it's this much bigger issue.
Sometimes I think they thought they could pick on the librarians, that we would be meek. But because I think you're right. It is multi-pronged, and for some reason we're one of the points.
And what libraries do is they protect everybody's ability to speak and share, and that's what they're trying to prevent, right? This is a public space. This is a space where anybody, no matter what your walk of life, no matter what your background, no matter what your experience, your economic status, you can come here and you can learn, you can speak, you can share, that's a space that's threatening to people who want to keep power very, very concentrated to a very, very small group of people. And so I think libraries are a target for a number of reasons. Children come here, right? We experience a lot of this pressure because it's all about molding young minds, right? Like if you teach kids when they are young to be open-minded and accepting, and that there are people of all different kinds of experiences, they're going to grow up to be adults who are going to create and support laws that support and promote a diverse world. And so if you are a person who specifically does not want a diverse world, you don't want kids to learn about diversity. And so it is part of this bigger picture of people who want to see the United States of America in particular be this very, very narrow thing that is and always has been a fantasy, right? We've never been that thing that people are trying to bring us, quote unquote, back to. We are something else, we are something bigger, and so those of us who recognize that are fighting for it on a lot of different levels across society.
I mean, in a way, conservatives are worried for a good reason about libraries because, this is where people get all the ideas.
Yeah.
Sometimes I feel like we could be alarmist about it. Like 40% of the banned books it's in Florida, and there are only 8 states really where it's almost 90% of it's only had. But then I think about what happened with reproductive rights. Right. And I think no, we can't be casual about it in the least because each state, I didn't know this about Indiana, where I'm speaking next month at a library. And it would be very interesting what the audience might be interested in if they're going to have legislation like that. But I think that we can't be at all complacent about it because it is all of these different things happening at once. And very troubling, very worrisome.
I think it's really important, and I kind of come at this from 2 directions. First, as an author, as a writer, a creator, but also as a former educator and somebody who still spends most of my time going into schools and libraries and working with kids. When you erase somebody's story, that really is an act of violence. And don't even think for a minute that you can separate the banning of books from violent attacks on people, right? Like the Pulse nightclub and like the hate crimes that we see. These issues are very much intertwined. Erasing a story is an attempt to erase people. And it's like what Alison said, when somebody labeled Fun Home obscene, that's not just labeling her life obscene, that's labeling the experience of so many children and so many families, who have had these experiences, who are living these realities. It's really awful. It's a violent act, and it's very personal for so many families. And it's one of the reasons we really need to be, I think, fighting it on a broader level. The other thing I want to mention is that I think it's easy to get the impression when you see a story in the news about all these book bans, that there is some vast group of concerned moms that has stepped up. It's not. There was just a story about how the vast...
I know we're very passionate.
Yeah.
I know we're very passionate, but we are going to have questions at the end. So I do appreciate the energy.
Yeah. And I'm right there with you. It is a tiny group, my friend. You're absolutely right. There was just an article, I think, in the Washington Post about how some huge percentage of book bans in the country, nationwide, most of them were generated by 11 people. So this is an attempt, it's a power grab for starters, right? People are pushing this because they're throwing red meat to a very conservative base. But there is not some vast army of moms that don't want their children to read books. Moms want their kids to read. Real moms do. And so this is just nonsense, this idea that there's some big group of concerned parents. It's not.
Yeah, they want it to look like it's a grassroots sort of backlash, and it's completely organized at very high levels by professional people with dark money funds. Huge amounts of money are going into this.
I'm going to change tack just for a little bit because I want to talk about the freedom to read, because our job as librarians is to make sure not only that there's not censorship or banning of books, but that there's free access to books. And as authors, creators, creatives, I'd like you to tell us about what it meant for you to have the freedom to read.
I've been thinking a lot about my quest to learn about sex as a kid, and I would read anything. I would comb through all kinds of books, just looking for that information, which I would find eventually. But on the way, how many other amazing things did I learn? I mean, I think that's what that's a natural curiosity that kids should have access to. All of that stuff. I don't know. I'm not being really coherent about that, but it's what made me do a lot of reading as a young person.
I think a lot of us who write stories for kids, and especially those stories that deal with real world issues, do that because we know that kids are looking for that information, because kids are curious. I remember growing up, I discovered Judy Blume at a really young age. I was a pretty precocious reader. I think I was 8 or 9 years old maybe. And I found a Judy Blume book that I liked. And so my mother went out and bought me all the rest of them. And I was psyched. Those of you who know Judy Blume know that there's quite a range of Judy Blume books, from Tales of a Fourth Grade Nothing on up to, Then Again Maybe I Won't, and Deanie and Forever, that explore those questions that young people have about sexuality. And so one day, my mother discovered this at some point after she'd bought all the books, and one day, like, 2/3 of my Judy Blume books went missing. And I was like, this is the weirdest thing. Has anyone seen them? And I had 3 older brothers and sisters who were like, no, we haven't seen them. And so maybe like 6 months later, we had this high shelf in the kitchen in a cupboard where we stored the extra Kleenex boxes, and like we were out of Kleenex. So I went up there and I got a box of Kleenex, and I was like, my Judy Blume books! So, kids, we seek out information, and kids today are so no different. They're looking for answers to their questions, and books are such a safe place to learn things. My gosh, they're better than so many other ways your kids are going to go questioning and exploring, and I think we so need to protect that.
Take the books away, and what are your kids going to do? Go to Pornhub? Is that a better solution?
fundamentally believe that they won't. Like, if you don't ever tell the kid that sex exists, the kid won't ever go looking for this information. It's not true if we remember our own experiences, right? I was motivated, I think I was motivated to read because I wanted to understand people. Like, I wanted to connect to the world. I was very shy. I was very uncertain of myself for many years, and I wanted badly to have friends who understood and appreciated me for who I was. And so I found people in books who had those friendships, and so it was a little bit of a fantasy to be in that space. But it was also a way to kind of try to understand who people were, like who other people might be. Because I know what's going on in my head, what's going on in somebody else's head, and that was really powerful to me. I do feel that I grew up with the freedom to read in the sense that my mother took us to the library twice a week. I was never told, to my knowledge, I don't ever remember being told that's too mature for you, you need to put that back, you can't check that one out. Like, I don't ever remember being told that. So in that sense, I had the freedom to read. But I also distinctly remember the moment in the back of my 7th grade English classroom where I turned that rickety paperback rack and around came Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry by Mildred D. Taylor. And that's a historical novel, a Newbery-winning book with a little black girl on the cover who had a pink shirt and jeans overalls. And that was an outfit that I had and I wore. And I grabbed that book and took it home. And it's still one of my favorite novels to this day because I believe it to be the first time I ever saw a black girl who looked like me on the cover of a novel that was written for people like me. And so while in that moment, at that time, I didn't have the context to be able to say, I'm lacking diverse books in my library, right, in 1980s Indiana, right? But I can look back and see how, when I remember viscerally and have chills for the power of that moment for me as a child, I didn't understand the meaning and the layers of it, but that's what I didn't have, and I saw it, and I grabbed it, and I took it home and like held it like this, right? Like that's what people are trying to take away, because now, today, kids have so many more of those opportunities to go. You look around this library, you'll see lots of little brown faces. You'll see lots of faces, of different cultures and different experiences, and they'll see themselves reflected in a way that I didn't. And so while I had the freedom to read in the sense that I had access, the books weren't on the shelves yet. And so we've done so much work in the last 30 years to get the books on the shelf, right? And so the idea that they're now going to be taken away, or that people are trying to take them away so that kids like me won't have that experience today, is just heartbreaking. And so, yeah, freedom to read. I think the people who are banning books, like, they theoretically believe in that. Like, we'll still bring the kid to the library and let him walk around, but we want that experience to be so curated that they won't see themselves reflected necessarily, and won't see anything reflected except what I think they should see. And that's tragic to me.
So leave it to the historical fiction writer. I don't want to tell a story about my freedom to read, but about someone else's from history. Okay, and the story starts in 1852 or so. A little bit later, there's a man named Greene. He lives in Maryland, which is a slave state, and when his owner passes away, he is emancipated, and he becomes a minister. And in 1857, he is arrested for being in possession of a book that is banned in the state of Maryland, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And he's sentenced to 10 years in jail for being in possession of that book. And there's a great to-do about it. And 5 years into his term, the governor says he's served enough, and he spent 5 years in jail for being in possession of this book. And when he was released, it made the news, including in Washington, D.C. Now it's 1862. And of course, the laws of Maryland don't apply in the district. So the President of the United States contacted the Library of Congress and said, I want to read this book. And he got it in June of 1862. And he had the book for 41 days. And during those 41 days, he wrote the Emancipation Proclamation. Freedom to read.
Thank you. Kind of picking up on what you were talking about, Kekla, with publishing, right? So we've definitely seen a change in publishing, right? That's been part of it too. And I'm wondering if any of you, and I think, Stephen, you talked a little bit too about this, in your work as authors, have faced any pressure from publishers in some way, shape, or form about a book.
I mean, there's too many ways to answer that, but in terms of, yes. The short answer is yes. Many, many pressures from publishers.
Maybe a time that sticks out where you...
Yeah, I mean, I think there's sort of several examples, right? Because there's the thing that I think authors sometimes forget is that publishers are purely and solely forever motivated by profit. Okay, and so those of us who go into writing, those of us who come to reading too, right? So authors and readers alike, we do this for passion, we do this for love, we do this because it enriches us, it gives us something, we feel like we're doing something for the world. Publishers just want to make money. Right? And so they will do whatever they need to do in order to make money. There's been a window now for a while where diverse books was a conversation and everybody wants diverse books, let's publish diverse books, yay! And so one of the byproducts of this banning conversation that I fear is that publishers will say, ooh, people don't want diverse books anymore, so we're not gonna publish diverse books anymore. That's a thing that I fear and a thing that I think is under threat potentially in the industry at large. Now, hopefully, publishers will be brave and stand up and continue to publish diverse books, right? And we as the public need to continue to buy diverse books to prove to publishers that people care about these things, right? As much as we don't want it to be about money, it comes down to that a lot of times in our culture. So whatever we can do to keep the publishers publishing diverse books, asking for them at your library, buying them yourself, buying them as gifts, urging people to buy them. Those are things we can do. Some of the things my publishers have done to try to make the books more marketable, quote unquote. I often have to have conversations about making the characters on my covers actually look black. The story's about black characters, but they put a character that looks very, very light-skinned. Almost every book cover, I don't have them in front of me here, I can pull some out of my bag, but almost every book cover that I've ever had, I've had to go back to the publisher and say, I'd like this character to look black. I need the skin to be darker on this character. Almost always, whether or not I have a black illustrator. And there have been a lot of conversations about what is appropriate for teens in terms of some of the civil rights content that I publish. I've written about civil rights in the contemporary and historical context, so writing about the Black Panther Party, for example, telling the history of that organization, and writing about the controversial shootings that have happened in many cities around the country and continue to happen, police shootings and things like that. There have been a lot of conversations about whether talking about things that are really happening in the world around us is actually appropriate for kids to read about. And so I struggle with that. So publishers are definitely very concerned with how our content is presented and what people are going to be looking for in the marketplace. And so I would like, as an author, for the publishers to be sort of pushing the envelope on those things, but the publishers really are responding to the market when these questions come up.
I'm in the interesting situation of I don't write for children, but my book Fun Home has found its way into high schools. When I was writing that book 20 years ago, it never occurred to me that it would be something young people would be reading, or I would have changed a few things. I just wrote it the way I would write it, for an adult audience. But I think, interestingly, as kids have been coming out at younger and younger ages, they're looking for work that supports that. I mean, when I was growing up as a young lesbian who didn't even know I was a lesbian, there was zilch about it. But kids are, like high school age kids have found this book. Like, books find their audience inevitably. And so part of, this adult book about coming out and suicide, that book is provoking some concern among these people. Another interesting thing about, I'm a cartoonist, so my work is visual. I've got drawings, and that is something that really provokes people. Somehow seeing a sex scene drawn is very different from reading about it. Like this one scene that mostly gets objected to in my book is pretty mild. And certainly there are other books with written, descriptions of sex that are much more graphic. But that's an interesting thing too with comics that people are trying to figure out.
You think it's that book banners have really bad imaginations?
Yeah.
It does baffle me that people are so concerned with what kids are reading when like kids are really good at actually sort of self-regulating what they'll read. And often, I don't know if you've ever gone back and watched or read something that you read as a kid, and you see and read and hear it completely differently because you didn't have the context for the world to know what some of the things that everybody's scared of you knowing even meant, right? So kids will go in and see something. Like, there are all these adult movies that I watched as a kid, and I mean, you know, movies that were marketed to grown-ups, not adult movies, okay? But like, you know, like a World War II movie, for example. My dad watches all these like World War II epics and stuff, and so I would watch something like that, you know, and be like, okay, yeah, it's about this battle, yeah. And then, you know, as an adult, I go back and I watch it, and I was like, oh, there's this whole other thing going on with these people, and there's all these layers, and I didn't have any of that context when I was a kid. You know, I was just like, oh, they're going to war. You know, and so like I really had a very limited understanding of most of the things that I encountered as a kid. It wasn't as damaging, I think, as the people fear that it would be. I think the benefit of kids actually encountering something that resonates with them is much. The benefit of that is much, much, much stronger than the likelihood that a kid's gonna be like, oh my God, like horrified by something that they read and really, really, you know, troubled by it even. Because if it's that far removed from their experience, they're not gonna understand it. And they're gonna make up a story about it in their own mind that works for them based on the context of their own understanding. So it's just not what people think it is.
You've all talked about having your work banned or censored in some way. What are ways that you think readers or communities can support you when these things happen?
I feel like I just talked, but okay. So absolutely, this issue of voting, right? The people who are in power, and not just who's president, right, but also who is your school board, right? Who are your local politicians? Those people have a lot of power in deciding what the curriculum is going to look like, and deciding what books are going to be in the public library, and whether there's going to be funding for the public library, and things like that. So really getting to know your local politics, really getting involved, going into your, I mean, everybody here is Vermont, going into your local public library in your own town or here and asking the librarians, like, what can we do here? Like, what's going on here? You know, if you were in Indiana, right, I'd be advocating people to go in and, you know, write letters to their congressmen and senators and local people about this new law, right? So there are really specific local things that we can all do. One of the reasons why it becomes easy for people to push, you know, against a diversity is that we feel small. Like everybody sitting here, like we're just one little person, right? And we can't do the whole thing. Like we don't feel like we can push against the ocean in the way that we have to stop this sort of onslaught, right? But we don't actually have to all push against the ocean, right? We can just do one little thing. And so I'm always talking with kids about how big of a difference one little thing makes. You know, whether it's literally, you know, putting something on social media, whether it's sharing a link, whether it's coming to a book festival like this and having this conversation, whether it's, you know, subscribing to a new publication that you didn't subscribe to before to support, you know, a magazine, or whether it's buying a diverse book and giving it as a gift to somebody. You know, every little thing that you do is actually part of the larger movement and is important. And so every time we say, well, I don't think I'm going to retweet that, for example, I guess it's X now. I don't think I'm going to repost that thing that person said because I don't think it really matters what people, you know, what people see me believe. But what if somebody else sees that, and what if that person is a friend of the senator, and that person talks to the senator over dinner, and then like, I mean, you don't know what the ripple effects of your little tiny actions are going to be. So I just say, don't discount yourself in the process of making change. Just stand up and do whatever little tiny thing you can do, however small it is. Like you've all done something today. You came here, right? So if everybody goes home and shares one thing they learned from this with like 3 people, right? Boop, look at how many people. Hundreds of people would suddenly be engaged in this conversation, and that's a big thing, right?
Just to add to that one little thing, a lot of times the first time people hear about a book that has undergone, you know, banning or challenges is when it gets banned or challenged. And wouldn't it be great if those people had some background, right? You are here at a library panel about banned books. So you are not, you know, the average citizen, but you have friends on social media and you have relatives who maybe didn't vote the same way you did. And what if they hear about that book for the first time because you're raving about it on Facebook? You're like, oh my gosh, I just read Fun Home, or I just read this other book. It is amazing. And they hear the good stuff first. so that there's some context there. You know, we all have people who can hear us, who maybe can't hear other advocates for intellectual freedom, right? It takes a whole lot of voices to make change. And this is a topic where we are desperately in need of change right now. And there are lots of people who are shouting from the rooftops in no uncertain terms. And we all have people that we love who maybe can't hear those people who are shouting because it's just out of their, you know, realm of comfort or whatever. But there's somebody who can hear you, who can't hear everybody else. And when you share those stories, just like Kekla said, when you go home and talk a little bit about what you heard today, that makes a big difference. You know, people can hear you and you matter to a lot of people.
I don't have anything to add. I have such a hard time with practical steps, so I'm just taking this all in.
Maybe I'll say something. I think it's more like climate change, where we want to make tons of small changes in our lifestyles, whether it's the mileage of our car, or how we heat our house, or how we heat our water for a shower, or whether we recycle it. There are all these small steps that we can take. And with all due respect, I think social media is not activism. It's a visibility thing, and that we actually have to do is show up. You go to a school board meeting, go to a library board meeting, and stand there. I've never liked a bully in any circumstance. I mean, one of the main reasons I support Planned Parenthood is because I don't like those jerks outside. I've never liked a bully. And so if you know, bullying is going to come before your library, and you think about all of the things that a library does, you know, I'm sure that if this weren't going on today, there are probably 25 things happening in this building today, right? It's just a Saturday, the public libraries are busy, that we stand up against the bullies. And that means being present, physically present, and say, you don't speak that way, and I don't agree with you. And in fact, there are a lot more people here, and I think there's nothing wrong with embarrassing a bully by showing up. So I really think, like, it's very good to say this is what I believe, and it matters, and it does obviously have repercussions, but I think actually showing up is the real challenge. Here is a start, but you know, it will happen in Vermont. You know, Montford already had a meeting August 17th in Barrie, right? And we're the only state that they don't have an organization in at this point. So they'll be here, and you'll have an opportunity to show up. And you want to stand up to the bullies.
Where are the tomatoes?
You know, peace and love.
Oh, sorry.
So I did forget to say the title of this talk, which is Book Banning, Censorship, and Rewriting Classics to Sanitize for Cultural Shifts. And I do want to throw out one question about that. I think some of you know that the Roald Dahl books have been reissued and there's been some changes. And I'm wondering for you personally, if there's a book that you read as a child, maybe you've reread it recently, that now gives you pause. And have you ever thought about, could it be changed to be either more reflective of the times, or maybe changed so it's less offensive? And have those thoughts occurred to you?
Say those questions again.
Well, like, is there a book that you read as a child that maybe now when you think back on, that maybe today it should be changed a little bit? Maybe it was a little offensive, or maybe it's not truly reflective of the times. I mean, talking about Judy Blume, right? Like, she even wrote just a little change in Are You There, God, Me, Margaret? So instead of pads with the belt and everything in the original, right? Now they're the kind with the adhesive strip or whatever. Has that ever, you know, have those thoughts ever crossed your mind in any way, shape, or form?
The cover of the New Yorker right now. Right? They had 4 people with walkers. So forget that it's very ageist and ableist and all that, but it's, you know, it's a Donald Trump, I don't remember, Mitch McConnell.
Nancy Pelosi.
No, it wasn't Nancy Pelosi, was it? I think it was Diane Pelosi. Yeah, I thought it was Diane. You know, and then Joe Biden. And the first thing is Joe Biden said he could kick my ass. He's in great shape, right? So that it was inaccurate. But also, when one of the people they have in a walker dies, and the thing is still on the newsstand, like, suddenly, oh, that's not funny, that's cruel. How about that?
I haven't seen that yet. I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's pretty offensive. And a lot of people reposted it saying, isn't this funny?
Okay, one thing we can all do is let go of this age thing. This is ridiculous. You know, we've all got to support Biden if he's 112.
Okay, so I think
Hey, he's perfectly mentally stable.
there's so many.
We'll
there's-
chat at the end.
So still referring, still on the question about wanting to change classics. Okay, so so an example of this, right? Just so people understand what the kind of thing we're talking about is like. So for example, because I write about civil rights, one of the books that has been held up a lot over the years is To Kill a Mockingbird. Okay, so this is a classic book. Probably at least half the people in the room read it in like 8th grade or something, right? It is, you know, it is a wonderful piece of literature. It is also very much of its time. It is a narrative that centers a white attorney and his child who doesn't totally have an understanding of it, right? The scout, the narrator, is very, you know, sort of putting her own lens on some of this, right? And but it's held up as this sort of portrait of civil rights, right? Because of the injustice of the accusation against Tom, I forgot his last name, the character who's on trial in the book. And so it has been taught for years and years and years and years and years. It is a classic text that people cling to and say, but you know, you can't expect anyone to graduate high school without reading To Kill a Mockingbird. Like that would be a travesty, right? Like that is a firmly held belief by many, many people in this country, right? And so when I read it in 8th grade, you know, and enjoyed it and got something out of it. When I look back on it now, my reaction isn't necessarily that I want to change that book, but that I want to say, well, what else can we teach that reflects how we see the world now, that reflects our understanding that we need Black writers to tell their own stories and things like that, right? So in terms of Roald Dahl, updating some of the little details in the book to make it more appropriate to contemporary life, I mean, I think that feels to me like a decision made by publishers because they know that these books sell, but they'll sell better if they don't have this word in it, right? Because we know we don't say that anymore. And so they're just gonna give it a little dusting so that it can still be marketable in the 21st century, right? And that I feel is, it maybe is okay if it's the author deciding, you know, like Judy Blume herself saying, I'm going to update the pad so that kids aren't laughing at this, right? But also that book was written in the 70s or the early 80s, and it's okay for it to reflect its time, you know?
And then you discuss what's different
Exactly. And so, because I think there is a risk of like updating things like the pad and forgetting to update some other stuff, and then thinking it's a contemporary novel and it's actually not. Like, I think it's better for things to stay in their time.
Who does it end up protecting in the end? It's not the right people.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that alone, like, I think the idea of updating something like the pad is so that it will not distance itself from readers, right? So that kids will see connection in it and feel like it's representing them. But I don't think that kids are that, or any reader is that wedded to the idea that the characters in the book must live a life exactly like mine. That's actually the whole point of fiction, is that you experience empathy. Yeah. You empathize with somebody else in their own experience, in their own place, in their own time. And so I think, you know, in the conversations that I have with educators who are wanting to continue to teach classics despite their problematic aspects, my suggestion is to look at what it is you're teaching from those books, right? There's not really any reason why we all must read Lord of the Flies or whatever, right? But we've decided that this canon is important because we've decided that these books represent something that is essential for readers to be able to process, for readers to be able to discuss. But there are so many other books that get to those same issues. So if it's that you want to discuss social justice, okay, there's lots of books that talk about that. We can update it. The Rock and the River, my first novel, has been used many times in the curriculum to replace Roll of Thunder. To replace To Kill a Mockingbird. It's also replaced Roll of Thunder. But it is not the same as saying why cling and say we must keep this book and haul it 100 years into the future and keep it relevant. That mindset, I think, is going to ultimately be problematic and is going to lead us to a place of more banning rather than less. Sorry, I'm going to stop talking.
Any other thoughts? No. Well, I think what you're saying is trust the reader, right? Like, I think that's, you know, a librarian tenet we have. Like, we provide all these books and we trust the reader. And I'm wondering, as authors, you trust your reader, right? You put your book out there. And I'm wondering if you can share with us if there's ever been a moment that a reader has come up to you and said something that has surprised you in a way that you didn't expect in a meaningful way?
I'm terrible at thinking of anecdotes like this. I'm going to completely blank.
I mean, I have one, but I just.
I think that's part of the beauty of writing is that you write the story and it's your story for a long time, and then the day it gets published, it's not your story anymore. It belongs to your readers, and constantly that happens. I mean, I have one man who writes to me every once in a while. He's in his like 70s, and he reads the Ranger in Time chapter books. And he loves them, and they are accessible history, and the print is big enough that he can read it. And you just don't know who's going to find your books. I had one girl that wrote to me actually about that book, The Seventh Wish, and wrote me this letter about how her experience was exactly like the character in the book because she wanted her mom to quit smoking cigarettes. But it's so interesting when I was like, oh, well, that's not quite the same thing. But at the same time, it was to her because that was what she read into it, this idea of somebody you love doing something that can harm them and letting you down. And how could this person do this to me? And the idea of addiction. And you don't know what readers are going to bring to it. You know, the text is the text that you wrote. But then when it's published, it's what you wrote plus the reader's experience. And that's, to me, kind of the magic of it. I really appreciate that. When we talk about trusting readers, if I can just put on my teacher hat for a second. When I used to teach 7th grade, I kept a really vast classroom library in my classroom, and kind of all the kids, whether they were in my class or not, knew they could come in and get a book. And so our middle school was 6th to 8th grade. And if you've spent any time with middle schoolers, you know that there is a huge, huge difference between a September 6th grader and a May 8th grader. And so I had this really extensive library that included everything. And at the beginning of every year, after I had my first book challenge as a teacher, I sent home a letter that I sent home every year after that, and I've shared since then. And it's a letter about how to use a library and how to help your kid use a library. And essentially it said, look, I have this vast library. Please understand it serves kids as young as 11 and kids as old as 15 or 16. And they all have different needs, and it's my job to meet everybody's needs, not just your child's needs. So if your child brings home a book that you don't think is the right book for them right now, please send it back, and I'll help them find a good right now book. And then we'll put that other book back on the shelf for somebody who does need that book right now. And if you want to talk with your kid about a book, if there's a book your kid brings home that you think is a little controversial, ask me and I'll get another copy of it, and you can read it together and you can talk about it. And that's what parenting looks like, and that's what's gotten lost in this whole discussion of banning books from schools.
Parents should be engaged with what their kids are reading. That's great. No one's saying they can't keep a book from their own kids. You just don't want to keep it from everyone.
Yeah, to recognize that everybody's values are not your values, and everybody gets to choose, So I always told parents, you have every right to help guide your child's reading, and you have no right to do that for anybody else's child. And it was really effective as sort of a preemptive strike. And I think we need to just kind of do that as a country now.
I have a tangentially related answer to this, which is I was surprised to learn at a certain point in time, I started, when I'd be out in public and doing book signings and stuff, all these young people would be having me sign Dykes to Watch Out For books, which is the comic strip I did for many years. And I started learning that these kids had all read it as children on their mother's. They found these cartoons on their mother's bookshelves. Oh, these are funny cartoons. This is why I guess people are alarmed about graphic work, because it is appealing to kids. So there was this whole audience I didn't know I had of children of lesbians who were sneaking these books and reading them. And they all seemed fine, stable adults. I don't think they were damaged by it in the least. But again, books find their audience in ways that you can't expect.
Yeah, and I would say, I think one of the things that's troubling for librarians is when we, for our public libraries, we curate collections, we are careful about it, and our collections reflect our communities. And our communities have LGBTQ people. Our communities have people of other races. And also, we're not going to get rid of books that have history in them, right? So I think sometimes the struggle is you're trying to have a fairly academic, sometimes intellectual conversation with people about, it's like you've all said, we're not forcing you to read any of these books, but you should not be forcing us to take any of these books away. They are here for a reason. They are on the shelf, and they've been curated because they meet a lot of the things that we look for when we put them on the shelf. This talk has been all very about, I think how disturbing it is right now. But, and my friends might say oh, Mary, sometimes you're too much silver lining. But is there anything good that is coming out of what's happening right now? Is there a silver lining to this moment that we are facing right now in our country?
Absolutely. I start with the diversity of books that are being published now and the diversity of authors that are being published now. I look at who the finalists are, the long list finalists are for the Pulitzer Prize and the National Book Award and the National Book Critics Circle Award, and how the pendulum has swung. It used to be all white males in there, not anymore, and that's great. I think you see new imprints that are coming up that are reaching in lots of directions. With all due respect, I worked in publishing for a while, and profit is not the only thing people are thinking about. Most editors want to find a great book. They want to publish a fantastic
I didn't necessarily mean editors, actually. I meant because I've had many editors say, I want to publish your book, and the publisher won't let me. Go on.
Yeah.
Giving editors a pass. Go on, please.
Any other things that you can...
I really hesitate to say there's any silver lining to book banning. There's just not. It's bad.
I mean, I would say there's a potential benefit if people band together and stop it. I mean, we have the potential to be in a transformative moment where we stand up and say, this is what we want and this is what we believe, and we are going to protect our books. And so if we do that, that would be a silver lining because it would have ripple effects, but we haven't done it yet. So right now, I agree with Kate that there isn't.
I guess I was just thinking, is it enough to be a galvanizing moment for the bigger kind of change that we're maybe looking for in the country?
I mean, again, it has the potential to be, but we have to stand up and make it happen, right? I don't think the banning itself is good in any way.
I mean, there's some interesting things happening legislatively. I just heard that Gavin Newsom has declared a ban on book bans. That's kind of...
Pritzker did that too. Pritzker did that too.
And people are exploring, whether it's unconstitutional to ban books in a couple places. I mean, that sounds kind of positive.
If there is anything that, what would be your message, I guess, to be that what would motivate people to kind of get behind the energy to stop this from happening? I think what we're seeing is, I didn't share this fact, but already in 2023, it's up even more by 20% than it was in the same time period from, I believe it was from January to June. So we keep seeing the escalation. And so I think there's some of us out there that are wondering, is there something, maybe it's not one thing, maybe it is several things, that is going to be the motivating piece to really get people to engage on this? Are we in a moment of it's just going to happen, there's not much we can do, or that's happening in New Hampshire, not Vermont, or that's happening in Florida, not here? I guess I'm sorry, I'm taking a long way to say this, but do we have to galvanize as a country, rather than the individual states where we're seeing such a disparity in the way this is happening.
I think, just to echo what Alison said earlier about this being one prong of a multi-pronged attack on democracy, I can't remember the source of the quote, but you know how it was a British abolitionist who said that education makes people easy to lead and difficult to drive, and it makes people easy to govern and impossible to enslave. This is an attack on not just certain books, it's an attack on libraries. There are already public libraries that are losing funding over this. In some areas that they're threatening libraries, well, unless you get rid of all the gay books or all these books or whatever else, no more funding for you. I think losing your library would be quite a wake-up call.
That sounds extremely illegal.
I think, but that's what we're talking about. It's an attack on public education, it's attack on libraries, it's attack on all the things that make our democracy work. And for people to understand that, I think is really important, and maybe that's the galvanizing force.
If I could talk about Moms for Liberty for a minute. They focused on one community in Arkansas and tried to get a bunch of books removed, and they were thwarted in that. And so they put together a referendum on the budget of the the library system there, and successfully cut its budget in half. And so they're closing a bunch of the different branches of that. And the director of the library resigned, and then was a finalist for director of a library in Michigan. And they found out and went up to Michigan and demonstrated against the guy so that he would not get the job. So there's, like I said, I don't like a bully. But I also see in Vermont that, lieutenant governors had this banned book series of events, and I was at the one in Middlebury, whatever that was, about a week ago, 10 days ago. And first of all, the room was full. Second of all, the library put together for the summer reading lists of high school students. They have to read 5 books in the summer. They put together a list of 30 books, all banned, that they could read. And they thought it was the best turnout they ever had for young people reading. There was also a mom there who was running a book group for teenagers out of, I think, Lincoln in Vermont. And she was, it was all banned books that they were doing. And last night, Dave Zuckerman said that he's got another 6 or 8 events that he's going to, that he's been invited to do, because a lot of communities want to come together and talk about this. And the one that I went to, it was actually interesting too, because one of the people that was most outspoken, and most people were in agreement, not on everything, but one woman who was most outspoken is a Russian professor at Middlebury College who was talking about what it was like to grow up in the Soviet Union. And which, is not, the comparison I should make is to German fascism, right? But there it is. And I think, there's somebody in that room, and when she started to talk about how you can't challenge anything, everyone was like, oh. There was kind of an awe. Realizing, how much power we have if we exert it. So one of the things I'd suggest is if you can get to one of these events, it feels good. Doesn't it feel good that we're sort of in the same mood about this right now a little bit here? I think it feels good to be there and have a bunch of people kind of head up about it. And it's not going to solve what's going on in that county in Arkansas. That's a complicated thing. But we can start by joining hands here.
Any other thoughts? Well, I would like to take this time to have the audience ask questions, and if you have a question, I'll repeat it into the microphone. So, James, I saw your hand go up first.
I feel terrible because it's not a question, and I feel like I should keep questions. It should be questions in the question time. But as far as democracy goes, right, with it's not enough just to vote, say, for school board, because nobody wants to be on the school board. So most school board members run unopposed. No, because nobody wants the job. Everybody hates you if you're on the school board, right? So it's really easy, even in a liberal community, for a bad actors, to take over the school board. All they have to do is run. They'll be the only one on the ballot for that area, and they'll win, and they can ban books. So if you can stand to do the job. Run for the school board, please, anybody. If the opportunity ever arises, run for the school board.
And maybe those people who do step up, support them, right? Or maybe the first step is make being on the school board fun. But yeah, I appreciate that comment. Yeah, Renee.
Mary, I want to ask about the sanitizing of classics in a different way.
Okay.
I'm concerned, in this day and time, am I allowed to watch any old TV shows? Am I allowed to watch any old films, listen to any old music, you know, with lyrics from years ago, read books that are questionable? And the publishers, by sanitizing, isn't that a form of censorship? Isn't it a form of censorship?
It certainly has been argued both ways. It's been argued that it's censorship. You know, what technically constitutes censorship is always a little kind of squidgy for people, right? Because we do things, you know, in our own minds, we edit in certain ways, right? I might decide, well, I'm not going to put that curse word in my middle grade book because I do want it to be carried by more libraries. Is that censorship? Maybe, technically, right? But it was a considered decision that I made about the book. Sometimes I do keep that word in, right? And okay, it might not make it into more libraries. That's the way that it is. I don't know if we have an exact, like, you know, there are definitely people who, as soon as they started editing Roald Dahl's books, freaked out. This is censorship. They're changing his words, blah, blah, blah. I mean, that's certainly a viewpoint. Like, I don't know what's right or wrong in that situation, right?
I see certain value to teaching old texts.
Well, I think sometimes it has to do with access, if I can just put in, like, you might, if a government came in and said, we are getting rid of all of these books because nobody should read them, I think it's different than saying, this is the book that you have access to in your public library, but you can also access the earlier edition digitally, or maybe it's kept in an academic library somewhere. I think that's a little bit different than people who are saying this book should not be made available.
Well, and talking about teaching it also is different too, right? Because when you're teaching something, you're giving it context by the nature of how you teach it, right? And you can teach things a lot of different ways, and you can provide context in a lot of different ways, which changes the text in the same way that the reader gets to make their own, you know, sense of the narrative. If it's just on the shelf somewhere, right, and kids today are encountering it, there are definitely books written in the past that I'm like, yeah, you know, I don't necessarily want a kid randomly encounter that because they don't have context on their own to understand the world in which that book was written and what it meant at the time versus what it means now, right? And so I feel like teaching a book that's older is different. And, you know, I don't know. Censorship is it's tricky.
Okay, so I'm a college student, and I just want to share my story a little bit, and then I'll ask a question. But like when Hunger Games came out, I was in like 4th grade, and we were all, my like whole class was reading it, but we didn't understand like the like larger political like. I mean, I was like, it's a cool girl with a bow and arrow. I'm gonna do archery too. Like, it wasn't. I didn't understand like the like larger implications, and now hearing about it as an adult, I like want to go back and reread it because I know it's going to be a different experience. So I just want to share that. And then also I was wondering if you had any advice for young creatives. Like I'm an artist, my partner's a writer, like, and we're in college about to enter the workforce. Like, do you have any advice for being someone who is controversial or diverse? Like we're both queer, I'm a person of color. Like, do you have any advice for people who might encounter challenges, especially being like young? Just our first work might be challenged versus work later down the line.
I feel like you're at an advantage when you're younger because you don't have anything invested yet. You don't have anything to lose, so you should just put it all out there.
I also noticed when you were sitting there that you were really energized by this conversation, and I just hope you just bottle it and hold on to it and keep making whatever art you're making and keep at it. You know, I had a long apprenticeship. I published my first novel at 53. You know, and just keep at it, because you've got that spirit, and it's a beautiful thing.
Okay. Can I just say one more thing? Okay. So my main advice for artists in general is that you have to always believe in your voice. Like, believe that you have something important to offer, and whatever is that core of the thing you want to express is extremely powerful. And to try to hold that separate from how you improve your craft. I get better at writing, I get better at drawing, I get better at creating my art. People critique how I present my art, people give me suggestions, right? I might have an editor, everything like that. That's separate from who you are as a creator and what you're trying to say in the world. So anytime people are giving you criticism, you take that as part of your craft. Like, I can improve my craft, but what I have to say is like important and powerful, and the world needs to hear it. And if you never let go of that, all the rest of it, you're gonna be just fine.
Yes.
I have a question regarding schools and the censorship of authors and how you feel about it. For example, I know of a high school here in Vermont that no longer teaches Salinger because looking at it in today's light and how the school may not approve of his relationship with young women. Or even Sherman Alexie and taking his book off of the reading list. How do you feel about keeping the book separate from the author's personal lives?
Did everyone hear that question?
Would you repeat it?
Yeah, the question was, how does the panelists feel about when there's an author who maybe has some personal controversy and their books are then removed because of that? And the examples were Salinger and Sherman Alexie.
There's an excellent book on this exact topic by Claire Deaver called Monsters. And it's an examination of artists, let's just say in general, who misbehave. And in some cases it's mild, in some cases not at all mild. And what do we do about, it opens with, what do we do about the films of Roman Polanski when we raped a 13-year-old girl, right? And what do we do with that? Because she says, I still love Polanski's films. And so she does, it's a real exploration, and I won't give it away except to say it's really worth the time. Monsters, it's called. I'm in the Picasso chapter right now.
I mean, that question feels related to what we were talking about with the what's the word? The books that are sanitized. It's better to talk about the problem surrounding the book than to disappear it, because then you're missing a chance to learn something. That's all.
I also just read that book, and it's very good and very thought-provoking. But I will also say that when I think about, well, first of all, the idea that anybody is anointed and ought to always be taught, I don't think is worthwhile, right? I don't care how long you've been teaching Salinger. Maybe you could mix it up a little, right? So I don't have any, I'm not going to go to my grave like fighting for Salinger's right to be in every classroom forever. I just don't think that's necessarily a worthwhile perspective, especially when we have so much literature being published that's more contemporary by a broader variety of voices, right? We don't need, my daughter, when she was in high school, studied books by only straight, dead white men until I think 11th grade. We just don't need that. So the idea that Salinger is somehow the best and should always be taught and never questioned, I don't buy into that at all. I will also say that as a creator, I did find the book very interesting, and I do have work that I love by people who have done things that I think are abhorrent. As a creator, though, I also can't help but wonder, particularly when we're talking about men in power like that and the interactions that they had with women, and particularly young women, how much art do we not have in our world today that we might have had those women been allowed to go about their lives and foster their own creative lives instead of dealing with this nonsense. And I grieve that lost art, too. So I think that's worth thinking about when we make those decisions as well.
Yes.
I just have two things to say. One is, Alison, I recently read your book, Fun Home, and I was really shocked in a good way. I mean, I thought it was really outrageous, and there's such value in having that kind of book for not only teenagers, but adults, old people. So just keep being outrageous, you guys. I mean, I realized it was a true story, that it was so brave, so courageous to write it like that.
Thank you.
Yes.
Alison, would you be comfortable telling us how you would have changed Fun Home if you knew it was read by a younger audience?
It would have had to be different from start to finish. I mean, I wouldn't give that book to a 12-year-old unless I knew them very well and, you know, knew what their life had been like. You know, it would just have been a very different project. I didn't mean to joke that I would have, yes, I might have taken that sex scene out, but it would not be that simple.
Yes.
I just have a question in general, perhaps to the whole group. We were talking about the activists that are making noise and banning books, and you spoke of a specific area. I don't have time to follow all those stories, but I have watched some of the instances in Texas, because I have family in Texas, and I'm just appalled. And there are examples where there was a big deal, and the news was all over it, but it got resolved because people made it be resolved. It was the fellow who wrote New Kid.
John Kraft.
Thank you. I didn't remember his name. He was to speak at a school just north of Houston, and one parent who admitted to not having read the book got it stopped, but in the end, he came. And I don't think anybody knows that in the end, people said, no, that's wrong, and he came. And I wonder, are we all being victims of the news not kicking up the back end? So we think, not that it's not worse, it's terrible, 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 but I think we would all be encouraged to hear the story at the end where it got fixed. And we don't get to hear that.
I think that's true if the story is presented as a path for other people to follow. Sometimes when we present the problem and then we present that it got all tied up in a nice, neat bow, it's easier in some ways to say, okay, well, that's solved. We can sort of check it off our list, right? It's a conversation I've had with a lot of writers about how we end our books, especially when we're writing about really complicated stuff like racism that isn't over yet. If you make, this nice story about the civil rights movement where, at the end of the book, the little black girl and the little white girl holding hands and skipping, right? As though we've solved racism, right? Like when you close that book as a reader, you feel, we solved racism. I can go home, and I can go read an action adventure novel now and not ever think about systemic racism again, right? That's an oversimplification, but there is a little bit of, if you feel this sort of satisfaction at the end of the narrative, it doesn't galvanize you in a sense, right? But if it's presented as a way of saying, this is a model for communities around the country, look what Texas did. Texas solved this problem. You too can solve this problem, right? Then.
That was a rare incident in Texas. I know, but it was an example.
But I think it's a good example, and I think you are correct that if people knew about it and understood it as a path, that it would have value. As opposed to us feeling like it's just hopeless, which I do think is a lot of the feeling. It feels like you're kind of responding to that feeling, right? It's not hopeless. We can do things. So yeah, I would love to see people talking more about what we can do, in the news.
I think sometimes it feels overwhelmingly it's the other, it's the other way. Like right now, I have colleagues over in New Hampshire, and they're tracking legislation in the State House, and there are 10 bills that are going to come up that I would call anti-library bills. One is to totally take away library trustees, and their role is to be, like everyone's saying, be a trustee, do that. They're trying to get rid of that. They're trying to put ratings on books. I don't know all of them. I can just say that my colleagues are in a place fighting that they have never, they never had to track, this kind of legislation before. They never had to worry about their friends losing their jobs. They never had to worry about a bomb threat. We talk about safety we feel pretty privileged here in Vermont, although I will tell you, there is a chilling effect that I think we spoke about. And can we blame these librarians that they live in small communities? They're on the front lines trying to put the books out there for these, kids, and yet they have to go to the general store and the post office and see these folks, and they're not getting paid a lot of money either, and libraries don't have reliable ways of funding. I know it's your panel and I'm venting, sorry.
Sing it.
So there are some good stories out there, but we don't feel like we're in a good place right now. We're feeling overwhelmed and stressed.
You asked about what we need to feel supported. It's really the librarians who need the support.
Yeah.
If I may,
And I would say school and public are almost 50-50. School librarians and public libraries are 50-50 on all these bans and challenges.
I think it's also worth noting that in front of you are 4 writers who have social justice very much at the core of the work that they're doing. This is not a panel of adventure writers. And there are some in Vermont, and they're good, right? And so that says something about this library and something about this festival and what's valued. And that matters too. And, that we're all here in a library having this conversation. And that you've got 4 people who want to stick their elbow in the ribs of society a little bit. That's so bad.
Are there any instances of censorship with libraries at the college or university level that you know of?
It represents about 1%, according to the data that I looked at. Very low.
You cite an example?
I can't, but I could get back to you. I have research people on call.
When Alison made the point about supporting teachers as well as librarians, I think, a lot of questions have been about like the practical steps, like, even the Texas question, like what's the back end, what's the practical step? And I've been a school librarian for a long time and a public librarian and a teacher as well. But I'll tell you, recently when I was a school librarian in Delaware in the Brandywine School Library Association, we knew in 2017 that, Liberty Moms
for Liberty?
That they were coming for us. We knew they had come for the lower counties of Delaware. We knew they were coming for us, and we knew we had to be as proactive as we could be. So we tried our best being librarians. Now looking back on it, I think the most important thing that we could know is that, and what you can do, is go to your school board meetings. One, because when we talk about getting like the most juice from a squeeze, and we talk about publishers wanting to publish books because they will sell them, it's no coincidence that these small conservative groups also wanted to take all of the books off all the shelves in teachers' libraries, right? Because a school library buys 1 or 2 copies. Teachers in every single school in that district, how many copies is that are going to students? Teachers will put in GoFundMes for, 5, 20, 25 copies of a book that's a diverse book for their classroom, and they'll do that for, text sets for 10 books. So they are taking away so many books when they, in Tennessee and Florida, take away teachers' libraries. So it's going to your school board meetings, and it's also emailing, if you know parents in the district, have them email the librarian and their teacher saying, because having things in writing matters, saying, I know of LGBTQI plus youth, I have a son or daughter, or I need this diverse book to help with the emotional needs of these children in my community. Write those emails to teachers and to librarians so they have that. So they can go to a school board meeting and say, I have 25 emails I'd like to read to you. This is representative of my entire community. So those are some practical steps when we're talking about getting the most juice, because we want to look at getting the most juice from our squeezes, right? Because they're doing that. They're being as pointed and as direct as possible. And to my mind, from my experiences in my life, that's just what I can share as being helpful steps. Thank you.
One really quick, we're at the end.
Just to add to that a little bit, also remember that teachers are building those libraries with money out of their own pockets.
Yes.
And the other places that you can call for backup is PEN America and the NCAC, which is the National Council Against Censorship. They're set up, they have packets of materials ready to go to teachers and librarians who need support.
Yeah, PEN America's doing really great work. If you need someone to give money to, they're a good one.
Yep, they're great. And I think there's United Against Book Bans too. There's some great organizations.
We need diverse books as well.
Yeah, and we need diverse books, yeah.
Children's literature specifically.
So we're gonna wrap this up, and I wanna thank you for being on the panel today. I know it was a controversial topic and a weird topic. I think, Alison, like you said, I'm like, everyone's just going to say censorship is bad. Like, what else are we going to talk about, Mary, for an hour and a half? But I do want to say, you authors are our rock stars. You guys are our rock stars. You write those books. You are the brave folks and are creative, and you put it out there so that there are mirrors for our readers out there, and windows and sliding doors. And I so appreciate the work that you do, and that you give of yourself in a way that's honest and authentic. And it makes our job so delightful when we get those boxes of books and we open them up, and it's like our birthday. And then there's another kind of joy when the books fly off the shelves and they go out into the community, and then they come back, and then they fly out again, and then they come back. And that's, like you were saying, that's democracy. That's building a community that's educated, that's learning, that's exposed to all these wonderful stories. So thank you so much. I really appreciate your work. And I really appreciate you being here and being on the panel and talking about this important topic today. So thank you very much.